Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. One of the most important independent officials in the entire executive branch, in the entire U.S. government, the director of the FBI, is leaving his job before the end of his term. And in doing so, he is taking one of the most important remaining guardrails in our democracy with him. Earlier today, FBI Director Christopher Wray gathered employees of the Bureau together and told them that he will not stay on for the last 3 years of his 10-year statutory term. Quote, "After weeks of careful thought, I've decided the right thing for the Bureau is for me to serve until the end of the current administration in January and then step down." The most incredible thing about all of this is Christopher Wray was supposed to run the FBI until 2027. After he was hired by, Donald Trump in 2017. But you see, the problem was that Wray was not sufficiently loyal. He did not let Trump turn the FBI's lawyers and cops into his lawyers and cops. See, as president, Trump tried time and time again to weaponize the Department of Justice and the FBI to go after his critics and perceived enemies. One of his biggest obstacles was Christopher Wray. But he was facing enormous pressure to resign from Trump's Republican allies, who were mad at the FBI for, among other things, searching Trump's Mar-a-Lago home to recover the classified documents he stole and that were definitely there. On Monday, Senator Chuck Grassley, the top Republican on the Senate Judiciary Committee, sent Wray a letter blasting his leadership, writing, quote, "For the good of the country, it's time for you and your deputy to move on to the next chapter in your lives." The pressure on Wray had also intensified after Trump named the guy he wants to run the FBI. That, of course, is Kash Patel, a MAGA loyalist who hosts conspiracy theory podcasts and who has vowed explicitly to, quote, come after anyone critical of Trump, including folks in the media and other politicians. On Capitol Hill today, Patel took Wray's resignation as a great big green light for him to take the job.
We look forward to a very smooth transition at the FBI, and I'll be ready to go on day one.
Have you talked to President-elect Trump? He just issued a statement on Truth Social supporting you once again and saying this is a great day. Any response to the President-elect?
By stepping down, Wray has basically cleared the decks and arranged a table for Trump. Wray did not have to do this. I want to be very clear here. Trump hired him to serve a 10-year term. That's the law. This isn't just plucked out of thin air. In fact, the law was passed in 1976 with overwhelming bipartisan support, and it was part of the post-Watergate government reforms. It says clearly, the term of service of the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation shall be 10 years, and a director may not serve more than one 10-year term. Now, the reason we have those term limits and the reason we try to insulate FBI directors from presidential appointments is, of course, J. Edgar Hoover, who ran the FBI and its precursor for almost half a century until his death in 1972. And over that time, he used its agents and technology for revenge and political influence, spying on celebrities and activists, concealing evidence, blackmailing adversaries, and currying favor with presidents. Congress enacted the 10-year term to prevent future Hoovers. Only 2 presidents since then have ever unilaterally fired an FBI director. Now, the first time is an interesting note. That was back in 1993 when the new president, Bill Clinton, removed the existing FBI director, William Sessions, for a long list of serious ethical violations. And crucially, the context here is that Clinton wasn't just trying to dump the guy he inherited so he could replace him with a loyalist. No, in fact, get this, he was acting on a report about Sessions' shortcomings by the outgoing Bush administration's Republican Attorney General, a guy you might remember by the name of William Barr, who would, of course, go on to serve as Attorney General under Donald Trump. In other words, Clinton bent over backward to show that he fired Sessions for cause, not for politics, completely unlike the second exception to the rule.
We begin with stunning late-breaking news. President Trump has fired James Comey as director of the FBI. It comes without warning and is sending shockwaves across Washington this evening. The president dismissing the man who was leading the investigation into his campaign. Comey, an Obama appointee, was less than 4 years into a 10-year term, but he became a political lightning rod over the last year between investigations into Hillary Clinton and into possible collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russian government.
Remember, in 2017, Trump's national security advisor, Mike Flynn, lied to FBI agents about his contact with the Russian government. And Trump tried to get Jim Comey, the FBI director, to quash the prosecution of Flynn. When he failed, he just fired Comey. And that put Comey's deputy, Andrew McCabe, in charge of the Bureau. McCabe, in turn, launched an investigation into Trump's politically motivated firing of Comey. Trump then replaced McCabe with Christopher Wray, a guy that he had high hopes for.
You have people. I think your new head of the FBI is going to be, I think I've done a great service for this country. I think that Christopher will do a fantastic job as the head of the FBI. So, look, nobody has greater respect for intelligence than Donald Trump. But you have to have the right leaders. I think we have great leaders right now.
God, he looks 20 years younger, doesn't he? It is easy to forget now, but that was all a huge scandal when it happened, precisely because of the history I just said, right? The context. This doesn't happen. And now, as Trump prepares to settle back in behind the Resolute desk with a vow to explicitly turn the country into something post-democratic, he wants to obliterate the norm he broke by replacing the FBI director he hired.
Sir, are you going to fire the current FBI director, Christopher Wray, who you appointed?
Well, I can't say I'm thrilled with him. He invaded my home. I'm suing the country over it. He invaded Mar-a-Lago. I'm very unhappy with the things he's done. And crime is at an all-time high. Migrants are pouring into the country that are from prisons and from mental institutions, as we've discussed. I can't say I'm thrilled.
Crime is not at an all-time high. In fact, it's much closer to an all-time low, at least in the last 60 or 70 years. It's declined quite a bit over the last few years of the Biden administration. The thing is, Trump did not even have to break this norm. Christopher Wray just did it for him by resigning, clearing the way for Trump to install his own guy at FBI, Kash Patel. Although, to be clear here, Patel requires Senate confirmation, which anyone who cares about this country should oppose. We're very far beyond this is not normal. Trump wants a lackey, a man whose sole qualification is his extreme loyalty to Trump as the top cop in America. And the one man who could have had something to say about it, the current FBI director, is just stepping aside, undoing decades of important precedent and accepting Trump's wishes. Joining me now is NBC News Justice reporter Ryan Riley, who's been following this story today. Ryan, I know you do a lot of reporting at the Department of Justice and the FBI. Is this surprising to you as it was to me?
It was surprising in some ways. I mean, we knew that he was going to be leaving in some way. We didn't know when he was going to be announcing that or how this would come about. But obviously, you know, when you sort of read the tea leaves and you saw that Trump interview, and we know that Kash Patel has been nominated for this position that, to be clear, is not open yet, right? It's sort of like a job listing that's already been posted, and, you know, he's in that job currently. So, you know, we sort of knew that something could be coming along. But I think, you know, the timing of it today was a little bit of a surprise because, you know, there had been this town hall scheduled. It had been sort of on the books for a few days. There was advice that went out about it on Monday, but it wasn't until today that we really realized that there would be rumblings of Chris Wray announcing his resignation. I mean, listen, people within the Bureau are very concerned, but that's also if you're just looking at mostly in D.C. and in management. And the Bureau is a pretty diverse, I would say, ideological place and, you know, conservative leaning even, especially out in different parts of the country. So I don't think that it's just universally condemnation of Chris Wray exiting. I think that there are people who, you know, like this idea and are supportive of Donald Trump and want reforms. Because remember, the guy who's going to be number 2 at the FBI, or the guy who could step into that spot after Chris Wray steps down, got an email very shortly after January 6th saying that there were many people within the Bureau who were supportive of the people who stormed the Capitol. So there's definitely this big contingent within the FBI of people who are very supportive of Donald Trump.
Yeah, say more about that context there, because I think that matters quite a bit. What you just said, something that came out in some of the reporting and the January 6th committee. You know, obviously there's thousands of people in the FBI. I think folks at the Hoover building are probably, you know, worried about the fact that Kash Patel says he wants to evacuate the building and turning it into a museum of the deep state. But as a whole, you have an FBI that is pretty conservative politically, I think it's fair to say, maybe one of the more conservative arms of the U.S. federal government. And that email and who is going to be the deputy director, and what is that email he got?
Yeah, so Paul Abate is the deputy, but he got this email very shortly after January 6th saying that, you know, Fox News is on in a lot of our various field offices, saying that essentially a lot of people were supportive of what happened. And there is this contingent, especially, it's a group that I've learned is pretty closely connected to Kash Patel of the so-called Suspendables, who have really been working pretty closely with Kash Patel. So, I mean, there is definitely a contingent within the FBI of people who are just kind of not happy with the way that things are going, and supportive of Donald Trump in general, and supportive of major reforms. You have a group of individuals outside of the Bureau, now former FBI special agents, who really do want the FBI sort of busted up and sort of shattered in a lot of ways.
All right, Ryan Riley, thank you very much. Senator Richard Blumenthal is a Democrat of Connecticut who serves on the Judiciary Committee. He joins me now. Senator, your reaction to the FBI director's announcement today?
This resignation is a result of raw political pressure. It's antithetical to what the FBI should be doing and what the 10-year term was meant to do, insulated from this kind of political pressure. But I will say, Chris, that I would have compelled Donald Trump to fire me. I would have stayed and spoken up. There's a lesson in the rise of tyranny in Europe during the 20th century, and a great scholar, Tim Snyder of Yale, listed a number of lessons, the first of which is, do not obey in advance. Most of the power of authoritarianism is given freely, and I'm afraid that democracy may be rolling over. It's a break-the-glass moment for all of us in defending democracy and defending institutions. And I think Christopher Wray should have brought it to a head and shown America that Donald Trump very simply wants to weaponize all of these law enforcement agencies, including the FBI, to go after his enemies list. And Kash Patel embodies not just the loyalist sycophant and bootlegger, but also the danger of that kind of politically directed FBI.
What, in the end, I think there's a lot of confusion, and I still have some about the 10-year term. I mean, a bipartisan majority passed the law in 1976. This was at a period where, in the wake of Watergate, there was a tremendous amount of reforms because of everything that had been uncovered about the abuses through decades at the FBI, the CIA, other arms of the government. So I guess it just turns out that was meaningless. Like, it doesn't matter, because even if Wray had not resigned, basically Trump was going to appoint Patel, and then what? Like, was that just a guidance, that part of the law?
You know, I think you hit a very, very important point, because the 10-year term is essentially unenforceable against a president like Donald Trump, who wants to break the norms and violate the spirit of the law, which was that the term of the FBI director would span a number of different presidents. And you're right about J. Edgar Hoover. That biography of J. Edgar Hoover shows very dramatically how he used the FBI, but he did it secretly. And what Donald Trump now is doing is, in effect, saying everything out loud and using it out loud to go after his political enemies. What Christopher Wray did in so-called invading Donald Trump's home, well, he didn't invade it. He had a search warrant to find classified documents, and those classified documents were there exactly where the warrant said they would be. So clearly this is retribution, and he will use this institution for retribution. And maybe we should try to strengthen that law to protect a 10-year term, but it isn't going to happen in the Republican Congress.
Yeah, I think that's a few bridges down from where we are. I mean, right now the question is Kash Patel. You have, the Senate Judiciary Chair Chuck Grassley, who you served with for a long time, who was just reelected at the ripe old age of, I want to say, 86, maybe. He wrote to Christopher Wray saying, for the good of the country, it's time for you and your deputy to move on to the next chapter in lives, clearly kind of trying to essentially soften the ground for this Kash Patel thing. You've got other folks from John Cornyn to Tom Tillis to Joni Ernst saying they think Patel is confirmable. It seems insane to me that he would be confirmed as FBI director, given the fact that he has explicitly, repeatedly vowed to use the Bureau as an instrument of prosecuting people for protected speech. But what do you think about his confirmation chances?
He seems confirmable only when compared to Gabbard and others who we've talked about, Setgith, Hegseth, who are even more unqualified, although it's a tough bar to surmount. I think that once attention turns to Patel and people review his past statements, I take him at his word that he would go after the press, he would pursue a house cleaning, as he's called it, he would use the FBI to silence dissent and protest. In effect, he would politicize and weaponize the Department of Justice. I've been a prosecutor, the U.S. attorney in Connecticut. I've asked the FBI to do investigations as a prosecutor. I've also served as state attorney general. Once an investigation begins, there's the power to ruin people's lives, financially, reputationally, in terms of family.
Yeah.
And this is a really serious and important position, which is why it should be insulated from political pressure.
A fun fact about the FBI, very few people know this, with the exception of two very brief, basically temporary acting terms, it has never been run by a Democrat in its entire existence. Democrats appoint Republicans, Republicans appoint Republicans. This is just the way, I guess, this branch of the government goes. Doesn't seem quite right to me, but what do I know? Senator Richard Blumenthal, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's true. Coming up, why the Pulitzer Prize-winning historian who wrote the book on J. Edgar Hoover says Kash Patel will be so much worse. That's next. The abrupt resignation of FBI Director Chris Wray was a result of an immense pressure campaign by Donald Trump and his allies. And that push to force Wray out is part of a larger effort to undo half a century of institutional reforms to the FBI passed in the wake of Watergate and the decades-long reign of J. Edgar Hoover. Donald Trump wants his choice for FBI Director Kash Patel to wield the authority of the Bureau against his perceived enemies, much in the way that Hoover did during his tenure. But, as my next guest writes, Patel views the FBI very differently from Hoover, and he is promising a crusade not just against Trump's critics, but against the Bureau itself. Hoover used to describe the Bureau as the one bulwark against a hidden left-wing conspiracy that penetrated all corners of American life. In Patel's world, the FBI is the conspiracy. Beverly Gage is a Pulitzer Prize-winning historian and author of G-Man, J. Edgar Hoover and the Making of the American Century. She also has a new piece in the New Yorker today asking, how would Kash Patel compare to J. Edgar Hoover? Professor, it's great to have you. I am really enjoying your book, which is just a masterful, masterful piece of work, so thank you for writing it. As someone who wrote a biography of J. Edgar Hoover and who's watching all this unfold, your reaction to Wray's announcement today and what it means for the Bureau?
Well, I'm sorry the book is so relevant at the moment, but I think Wray's resignation is a real sign that the Bureau is in trouble. You know, Hoover had lots of faults, but he believed in the Bureau, and he actually mostly tried to insulate it from political pressure that he didn't like. And here we're just seeing kind of naked announcements that the Bureau is going to be used as a political weapon.
Yeah, you write this. Hoover, for all his faults and abuses of power, was nevertheless an institution builder. He believed in the FBI's nonpartisan independence. Patel's chief goal, by contrast, is to weaponize the FBI as a partisan force to protect Trump and wreak vengeance on his administration's enemies. If such naked politicization happens to undermine public faith in the FBI, so much the better. The big difference here is Hoover ran the FBI as kind of fiefdom, where his own ideological axes to grind, petty grievances, wherever, it was a vector for that. It was not a vector for the president in power. In fact, sometimes it was deployed against them. How different would it be to have an FBI basically acting in a Hooverite-like, fashion, but on behalf of the guy in the White House?
Hoover served under 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans. So he was, for all of his faults, a sort of legitimately nonpartisan figure. And of course, the critique when he died, he was there for 48 years, was that the Bureau had become too independent. It was too insulated. In fact, that, the FBI director was more powerful than the president. So I don't think we want to go back to the era of J. Edgar Hoover. But in the circumstance we're in now, I think you can see some of the virtues in that kind of independence and the ability to be insulated from this kind of really direct, bald political pressure.
You make this really important point that I think it's worth us lingering on for a moment. Obviously, there are constitutional checks on abuses of power through, those rights secured in the Constitution, and judges and approving warrants and things like that. Now, those can sometimes be flimsy in the real world, but they exist. You make the point that the worst abuses, you say the worst abuses of FBI power have usually come through its intelligence and surveillance operations. Making a criminal case in court is hard. There are laws and procedures and evidentiary standards. Intelligence investigations operate in a more nebulous realm. Tell me more about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, the FBI is this funny kind of hybrid organization where, on the one hand, they're a law enforcement agency, but we've also made them into our domestic intelligence agency. And certainly during Hoover's day, it was the intelligence side where almost all of the abuses occurred, in part because, intelligence doesn't have quite the same kind of evidentiary standards. Often you're not trying to make a case in court. You're just trying to kind of get dirt on people, figure out what's going on. And, at various points, the FBI can use wiretaps and bugs and even infiltration of political organizations if they deem that they are somehow dangerous enough. And so it's a very powerful set of tools. There are some restrictions on it, but, this is a big, secretive bureaucracy. And in the hands of the wrong people, even that power of investigation and surveillance and information gathering can be really powerful and dangerous.
What would you ask a senator who came to you, having read your book, and was preparing, say, for a hearing of the nominee, Kash Patel, trying to think through what are questions or concerns they should be airing and focusing on?
Well, I think one of the things that he could think about is really just whether Kash Patel knows how to run a bureaucracy. I mean, I think one of the things that is alarming about Patel is not only this idea that he's going to weaponize the Bureau, but that he kind of wants to come in with a wrecking ball and in some ways destroy certainly the upper echelons of the institution itself. So he professes to be a great ally of the rank and file, but he wants to destroy, shut down, get rid of the D.C. headquarters. And that's just a very strange thing to think about, a massive law enforcement and intelligence bureaucracy operating without a headquarters. So there are lots of political questions to ask. There are lots of questions about, respect for law. But there's also a question of, does he actually want the FBI to be a functioning organization or not?
Beverly Gage, thank you very much for your time tonight. 6 months after the insurrection on the Capitol, the House Select Committee on January 6 was formed. It was a bipartisan effort with 7 Democrats and 2 Republicans. For about a year and a half, the committee made its case to the public in televised hearings that then President Donald Trump fomented a coup to overthrow our democracy after his defeat in 2020.
American carnage. That's Donald Trump's true legacy. His desire to overthrow the people's election and seize the presidency interrupted the counting of electoral college votes for the first time in American history, nearly toppled the constitutional order, and brutalized hundreds and hundreds of people. The Watergate break-in was like a Cub Scout meeting compared to this assault on our people and our institutions.
Now we're just a month away from Trump taking the oath, and already he's very clear-eyed on what he would like to do to those who served on that select committee.
Honestly, they should go to jail.
So you think Liz Cheney should go to jail?
For what they did.
Everyone on the committee, you think
I think
should
everybody,
go to jail.
anybody that voted in favor.
Are you going to direct your FBI director and your attorney general to send them to jail?
No, not at all. I think that they'll have to look at that. But I'm going to focus on drill, baby, drill.
Oh, yeah, drill, baby, drill. Joining me now is someone who is on that January 6th committee, Congressman Jamie Raskin, Democrat of Maryland. Congressman Raskin is also running unopposed to be the top Democrat in the House Judiciary Committee. That should happen soon. Congressman, good to have you in the program.
Thank you so much, Chris. I'd not seen that footage before, and it's a relief to hear him say he's focusing on drill, baby, drill, and not jail, baby, jail.
Well, I don't know how seriously either you or I take him saying that. I mean, obviously the threats of jail at some point are ludicrous. Like, jail for what? People don't just get thrown in jail. But I guess, given the fact this first interview he had with Kristen Welker this weekend, it's clear that the finish the job of January 6th, meaning pardon the folks who have been convicted and who are in prison for it, go after people on the committee, is still what he wants to do. What is your preparation for that?
Well, under the American rule of law, people are sent to jail only after having been convicted by a unanimous jury of their peers for having committed a criminal offense, and the prosecution has to satisfy the burden of proving that they committed every element of that offense, and then they're sentenced to jail. So you don't go to jail simply because a president considers you a political foe. And so, one of the tragedies of what he's doing is that he's miseducating a lot of people, a lot of young people in the country, about how our justice system works.
Well, I think he's modeling how he would like it to work, which brings us to the question of Christopher Wray's resignation today. First, your reaction to Wray's decision, which a lot of people feel, Senator Blumenthal said it was essentially obeying in advance. I've seen other criticisms of that sort. What do you think?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it does seem to violate Tim Snyder's principle number one, don't obey in advance. But look, we need people who are ready for the fight. And there are people who are exhausted by it. There are people who've been worn out and demoralized. And we just need new generations of pro-democracy, pro-freedom patriots to take the roles that that need to be occupied in order to defend our constitutional order against these people. So, I thank him for his service. I wish he had hung around for a few years and forced Donald Trump to fire him for the imaginary offenses that are floating around in his mind. But apparently he didn't want to go through that for whatever reason, and he might have good reasons for it. It's hard to know. The main thing is we just need to be mobilizing people to get ready for this. And, the new FBI director designate, anyway, is a pure political sycophant whose political philosophy is embodied in a children's book that he wrote about King Donald, whose hero is Cash, who is the protector of King Donald, who fights off Queen, I think Hillary Clinton was the name of the comic book hero in this comic book vision of American politics. So, there is a jovial and absurdist quality to these people, but they're taking over the most powerful institutions in the government.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I feel there's two things. It seems to me that there's a certain line of thinking among Democrats, excuse me, which is that the sort of 100% resistance posture last time didn't work and has been discredited, and that arguments about democracy fell flat with the electorate, so no one wants to hear it, save it. And I just wonder what are all you going to do? What's everyone doing here as the incoming president is making very obvious noises and very obvious actual decisions designed to subvert the American rule of law and basically finish the project that he started on January 6th?
Yeah. Well, look, we lost an election by around 3 million votes. Joe Biden had beaten Donald Trump 4 years before that by more than 7 million votes. So obviously the country is closely divided. And So we're going to alter some tactics and strategies and figure out how the right has captured a lot of the social media, and I think we have been outflanked there. There was nothing wrong with the massive ground game and the door knocking and the canvassing that took place in the election, but there are clearly some changes that need to be made. We're not going to change our values. We're not going to abandon American constitutional democracy because we lost an election by 1% or 1.5%. We're not going to abandon the rule of law. We're going to be recruiting and mobilizing hundreds of thousands of millions of more people to get out there and be leaders in this fight. What else can we do? This is not a game of volleyball or badminton where we're going to, quit the game or something. I mean, this is the fight of our lives that we're in now.
All right, Congressman Jamie Raskin, thank you for your time tonight.
It doesn't sound on your answer that you've gotten to a yes. If I'm wrong about that, correct me. And if that is the case, it sounds to me as if the hearing will be critical for his nomination. Am I right about that?
I think you are right. I think for a number of our senators, they want to make sure that any allegations have been cleared, and that's why we have to have a very thorough vetting process.
That was just 6 days ago. Republican Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa said she had not gotten to a yes on Pete Hegseth for Secretary of Defense. She said a very thorough vetting of him was needed, and any allegations against him have to have been cleared. 4 days later, before hearings, of course, Ernst seemed to change her tune a bit, saying, "As I support Pete through this process, I look forward to a fair hearing based on truth, not anonymous sources." Not quite a yes, but closer. What changed is an intensive campaign of bullying and threats against Ernst, who is seen as key to Hegseth getting confirmed, including an ad that targets Ernst's home state of Iowa.
The deep state is trying to stop his nomination, but Pete isn't backing down. Call your senator today and urge them to confirm Pete Hegseth for Secretary of Defense.
It did not stop there. Earlier this week, an Iowa-based conservative podcaster named Steve Deace devoted a big part of his show to talking about how to politically punish Ernst.
Next hour, we are going to walk through the process of taking out an incumbent U.S. senator. Because the biggest story that's happening in domestic politics right now is Joni Ernst and the Pete Hegseth nomination for Department of Defense.
Here's why they are pushing Hegseth so hard. After the Matt Gaetz pick blew apart, the right wants to make sure that no other Trump choices fail. And so Trump allies are trying to cast the allegations against Hegseth as a creation of the deep state, the media, anonymous sources. Although, let's just be really clear here. The complaints, many of them have been anonymous, but are coming from fellow conservatives who worked for Hegseth, like members of the Koch-funded Veterans Advocacy Group, CVA, and a Republican woman who told a nurse